So here I am in Sinjar, northern Iraq, and as you can see behind me, this is where ISIS came through on August of 2014 and just really leveled this place, took over the entire city. It's about 80,000 people used to live here. A lot of people died, and it's been a war zone ever since. You can see damage just everywhere. The front lines is right that way, about 1 mile. So ISIS is still definitely in this region, but they're not in this city anymore. This is such a graphic illustration of the refugee crisis of today. This is the worst crisis of refugees that we've ever seen in history outside of World War II. World War II is the only catastrophe that's created more refugees than ISIS. There is 11 million refugees in Syria alone and millions more in Iraq. That's not counting Turkey and Jordan and all these other countries that have just enormous amounts of refugees that have nowhere to go because this is what their hometown looks like. On the way here, we passed so many villages that are just completely leveled, nothing left. And so now you have tens of thousands of people living in tent cities, and they're just sitting there with nothing. They'll be there for years until their homes are rebuilt and ISIS is defeated. So what's my point? It's simply this. During and after World War II, historians have looked back and said if the church simply would have stood up for what was right, stood up against Hitler, against the Holocaust, against the mass genocide that was going on, helped the refugees, helped rebuild, history could have been totally changed. Some historians believe that if Christians would have simply stood up and said, hey, what's going on here is wrong, we will support the Jews, we will not stand for genocide, we will help these refugees, we will help rebuild, we will do whatever is necessary to stop this. We won't necessarily fight, but we believe this is wrong and we will stand against it. There are people out there, historians, that suggest Hitler would have been unable to kill hardly any Jews. The death camps would have never existed. And the refugee crisis of World War II, which had tens of millions of people, would have never happened, or would have been much smaller. Here's the question of today then. History is repeating itself. We are faced with an almost identical crisis. As I was walking these streets, I look across, I see all the devastation, I see the bombed out buildings, and all I can think about is those pictures my grandpa shows me of bombed out Poland and Germany, where cities were leveled, and you had an exact same scenario that's happening right now in Iraq. Right now, there are millions of refugees and destroyed cities, just like there was in Europe after World War II. The question is, what will the church do this time? Will the church respond like it did last time in history and not stand in the gap for these people and not be the change and the solution necessary to solve this crisis? Or will we step up, change the course of history, and not do what our ancestors did? Will you step out and say, hey, what is happening is wrong. What can I do to help? I am unhappy with my comfortable life in America while millions are living in tents in the desert because their homes look like this. This was a street in a city, and look at it now. Totally trashed. Are you okay with that? Does that keep you up at night? Or are you just like, somebody else will take care of it? There is nobody else. If everybody said that, nothing would ever happen. Will the church repeat history, or will it change it? How will you respond?